Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This week's show, we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, Season 1, Episode 6. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we catch up with Gideon, or rather, Gordon, and he's at Julie's place watching anime. Which I loved it later, because obviously he invites Lucas over, which I love the whole thing of like, oh, he's like, Lucas, it's actually not even my real name. My real name's Luke. And Gordon's like, dude, it's not the same thing, whatever. But I want you to come over here, because he's like, you want forgiveness? You can do something else for me. I want something else from you. And it's like friendship, and they have like this whole bro thing. They're, doing paintball guns in the house. They eventually build a ramp in there. And I was like, this isn't your house you're trashing. It's Julie's. Which she immediately comes back as like, I was gone for 90 epping minutes. What did you do to my place? So I love that whole situation. And obviously, when we rewind to find out Ramona showed up there like 90 minutes ago, they'd be like, yo, I got to talk to Gideon and you. And it's like, hey, is that Ramona? Tell her to come on in, like, eat some chips and watch TV with us. So it's so interesting that he has no interest in getting back with her. But it's like, it does seem like him and Julie. And he's like, oh, I miss you. She's like, not as much as I miss you. And I'm like, oh, so you two are actually dating. It felt like that last time we had seen each other, that was like they were setting up. There's a lot of setup of like romantic stuff in this. But either way, well, I mean, I think this genre-wise falls under like the romantic comedy genre. I mean, it's a part of the series. But either way, Julie talks about how she knows Gordon. And it's like, right, he was a kid everyone called fearless because he always wore those no fear shirts, but he kind of took it a little too far and actually thought he actually was fearless. So he came up with this like book of plans of like 12 steps of like 12 reasons why this girl should go out with him. He was embarrassed in front of the whole school. He left, and that's the last time Julie ever saw him, and had no idea that. Well, she knew of Gideon, but she never knew that Gordon Goose was Gideon Graves. So I also love the entire time that Stacy's listening in, and I was about to call him William Wallace. Is that how Wallace kind of keeps tabs on stuff? Is because Stacy's up there like running her mouth about stuff? To be fair, they're having this conversation out in public, so of course someone's going to hear it, but still. And I love that Julie's whole thing was she liked Gideon being evil, but the problem is after a couple of days he gave up on revenge because he was all about getting revenge. And for her, it's like, oh my God, that was super hot. But now he's just a loser that watches anime all the time now. And it's just like, oh, like, it's not sexy at all. So it's kind of crappy. Because at least I love that Ramona was like, I mean, granted, he wasn't the greatest guy. He was kind of a very selfish, egotistical douchebag. But at the end of the day, as long as he makes you happy, I mean, that's good, I guess. At the same time, this is all going down. Knives and Steven they ended up pitching to Matthew. They're doing a play of Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life, but it's like Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Musical, which is like it's like, oh, that's very poetic, and it feels very befitting to kind of make this into a musical. Failed as a movie, but maybe we can make it as a musical, because it turns out, and getting Matthew to play the lead, which for him, that's all he wanted to be, was the main character. And he kind of has to an extent, which is like super meta, because he kind of he's like, oh, I'm the main character, I beat the main character, so that kind of puts me main character status. And he's only made a few pop-ins in the show. Funny enough, he's actually been in the show more than Scott actually has, so that's hilarious. But it's like funny, like he's main protagonist role, but he's not been in the show a lot. But then like you have the main protagonist being Scott, who hasn't been in the show a lot, so it's funny how that works out like that. But yeah, Knives and Steven were able to kind of get this whole thing going, and so they're trying to come up with new music. I mean, it was only, I think it's so interesting because I'm like, you didn't invite Kim to that meeting. It was only Steven and Knives. To be fair, they are the ones that kind of put in the work to reach out to Matthew last episode, which I completely forgot to talk about that. Like them reaching out to him, trying to get Ramona to hand Todd, try to get, because of Ramona's connection to Todd, hoping that they could use that connection to try and get the music to Envy as well. But obviously it worked out in the end, because now they're able to make this musical, which they're trying to talk to young Neil about it. It's like, oh my God, like, we're so sorry. We're going to be very respectful of your property. He's like, dude, I don't care. I'm not that bummed about the movie. And Steven's like, dude, like every song I write is like like one of my children. So how is it you have no connection? And he's like, well, technically I didn't write it. It's like, what do you mean you didn't write it? It's like, well, my sleep paralysis demon did. And everyone's like, are you sure it actually was a sleep paralysis demon? I was like, well, what else could it have been? The person who actually wrote the script. And he's like, I didn't, once again, movie and everything, I was like, I don't, maybe it's also because we didn't get to spend that much time with young Neil, but I don't remember him being such a fucking idiot. But either way, they discover something while they're looking at something about the script, which we'll talk about later on. But at the same time, this is all happening. Ramona and Julie come back home to find Luke, and which I also love that line from Luke where he was telling, not Luke, from Gideon when he was telling Luke, because Luke's like, wait, are they really a good match for each other? He's like, I feel like they kind of hate each other most of the time. He's like, this is season 12. I could give you the rest of the DVD so that you can catch up on the backstory. I mean, it's like almost like, I mean, obviously it's very like cliche or whatever, but you're also like, oh, that's very true to anime. There's, because like you think TV shows have a will they won't they that strings out on a very long period of time, ain't got nothing on an anime or manga, bro. Like an anime or manga will tell you like, oh, you want to do the will they won't they and stretch out for a long time. Hold my beer. So but either way, Luke gets kicked out. Well, Lucas gets kicked out because it's like, right, you can't stay here. He's like, well, the fact of the matter is I'm flat broke. I don't have enough money to get a first class ticket, plane ticket home. But I also like the only job I can get now, because I got fired and everything, is voiceover work. And he's like, for me, it's live action nothing, which I'm like, that's hilarious. I love that. Once again, just how like meta this all is. I wonder is that also supposed to be like a little bit of a commentary, because for some people, not saying everyone feels this way, but some people could view, because I know sometimes video games, I think it's changed now, but I think for some people, going to video games means that your career is dead, and maybe for some people, if you go over to voiceover, your career is dead. Not saying everyone feels that way, but I feel like, I mean, that's probably like a very, very old Hollywood thought process. Maybe I'm mistaken. I mean, considering like how like big voiceover has been in the industry. I mean, going probably further back, but I mean, obviously one of the titans of it would be like, you know, the Looney Tunes. So I don't know. It is one of those industries where like voiceover actors, I feel like don't get the love that they should. There are so many talented voice actors that it's just like, yeah, let's kind of get a big name for something rather than like this well-established voice actor, because it is a different muscle. That's a whole deeper conversation. I feel like you could like dive deeper onto that conversation, but it's also just him being like, oh, I want to be front and center. You got to see my face when I'm doing my movie. Like that's what it really comes down to. I don't think it runs any deeper than like, you know, I want to be on screen because my voice is one thing, but being able to see me, that's where I'm able to kick up the charm, and that's where I've made all my success. Well, except for the recent string of box office bombs he's had, apparently. So, but then we also had the robot, which I've completely forgotten to talk about every single time because it has been in literally every episode, which Ramona's like, why do I recognize the thing? It's like, well, because it belongs to the twins, which made her go like, oh, that's why I recognize it. Well, not necessarily that she recognizes it because of that, but this is also the first time I feel like we've ever gotten into why I mean, Gideon being who he is kind of makes sense why they broke up. They didn't really go into that's why they broke up, but it does seem like, well, it seems like very, 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 very likely to be the reason, but it's like, her talking about the twins, it's like, right, she was kind of the latest girl, like, oh, this is the new girl this year that I'm gonna try and go after, and both brothers tried to. They were players trying to play her, and she played them back, which pissed him off. So she's like, okay, so they were coming after me to get revenge. Okay, so because she ended up breaking it all down to being that's her explanation for the whodunit of this episode of like, right, this is why and who and how, like this robot, because it's like, I mean, it makes sense too. Even when she explains the vegan powers, like, you know, like what's more powerful than a vegan, and young Neil being like, 2 vegans. It's like, no, a robot vegan. Everyone's like, oh, it's like, yeah, vegan. It's a robot that's never eaten meat, which I'm like, are there robots that have eaten meat? But either way, it's like, right, it's not weighed down by just kind of like the unsulliness that is, you know, humans. But it also makes sense because what did Envy say last episode? She was gushing about the vegan portal, like, oh, it's so perfect and how it's crafted. It's like, well, where a human would have flaws to it, of course, a robot would be able to like put the calculations and be able to create a perfect like portal. So it actually makes so much sense when Ramona kind of breaks it down like that. Oh yeah, it would make sense for it to be a robot. And obviously because of Ken and Kyle's issues with her, because she was able to remove the rest of the X's, which I even love. Steven's like, okay, 5 X's. How many are left of the 7? You know, it's like 2, Steven. It's 2. Which even they found out about, because they also were like, damn, Ramona, when they found out like she was playing Ken and Kyle. But even Knives kind of being sad, being like, yeah, like, you know, oh, we kind of know that situation. Ramona was like, what are you talking about? You know, someone dating someone else at the same time while they're dating someone and neither of them knowing about it. She's like, oh, right, Scott. Us. It's like, yeah, why that immediately come to your mind? I even love Knives was kind of, because I love that Knives was kind of like, oh, do we really have to work with Ramona? But Kim had to be the one like, you do realize she's been looking for Scott this entire time. She's been rollerblading around, talking to stupid people, asking great questions. And Knives is like, oh, I had no idea she was doing it. It's like, yeah, because literally everyone moved on. Even you were like so in love with Scott, but you immediately dropped him and sex bomb when, Envy showed up. Because you're like, oh, they're my favorite real band. You're my favorite. I love you. You're my favorite not real band. So ever since then, Knives kind of strayed away from like Scott, you know? Once again, it just makes it so much poetic that like the people around him, whether it's whether it's an ex who's now a friend like Kim or just any of his friends or roommates like Wallace, that everyone moved on except, once again, Ramona, the girl that he went on a date with once and one time. Like, you know, that's just insane. That she's the only one willing to put forth this effort. Like I said, I made this whole point last episode too, but yeah. I also love that young Neil line of like, oh yeah, he's like, this is my favorite part of a who did it. You know, when you find out who did it, and Kim's like, it's a who done it. He's like, it'd be more likely a who done it. It's like, oh God. And also she was like, Ramona was like, oh yeah, the suspect. And he's like, oh yeah, that's similar to the word suspects. And Knives is like, wow. And Ramona's like, yeah, wow. But Ramona believes when it's all said and done, she does believe that she found out who kidnapped Scott. And she goes back through the surveillance footage because she's like, yo, I think I know who did it. But even I'm like, and then immediately your brain starts breaking because you're like, whoa. If you were able to see, you can literally see the robot having glowing like green energy in front of its hands. I'm like, so how did we not piece it together? To be fair, we're talking about some mystical stuff of like, now that she's figured stuff out, now the tape has expanded to show that. Because I mean, obviously the video footage always showed the dynamic fight between, the beginnings of the dynamic fight between Scott and Matthew. And it's like all of a sudden now we can see the robot but now like in clear focus you can see the robots opening a portal. I'm like, why didn't we see that before? You know, I'm sure you would have scrubbed that video front and backwards to find any clue, but now you know what you're looking for. Like I said, it's more likely like the tape, the evidence that is the tape expands to fit like the new knowledge that Ramona now has. Like that's what it's meant to be, because I guess because it's also not just a regular tape, because it's also a TV that once again, like it could be like, I don't even see her plugging it in. So that could just be like a thing of like, well, don't worry about plugging it in. It's fantastical. We don't have to think about it. Just like let it be. It's just interesting that it's like she's viewed this tape multiple times and all of a sudden it's like, oh, the robot's in clear view doing the thing. But like I said, I think maybe logically speaking, and this is me being logical in an illogical world, that maybe even in its illogicalness, kind of like, hey, a science versus fiction conversation that we get in Loki, maybe this is like a situation of like, well, it's not science or realism, it's fiction. And so it's just like, yeah, the tape, the knowledge, the information that's on the tape, the footage that's on the tape expands the moment the viewer kind of unlocks more about what went down and kind of gives you a better view of everything now that Ramona knows. But then we get the reveal from the others about, like, they don't know who wrote it and this and that about young Neil's script, but it was written 14 years in the future. I was like, it is a time travel thing. I knew it. And then they open the door and lo and behold, who's there? It's Scott. He's back. It's like, yeah, it was the twins. Yeah, it was like the robot. Yeah, it was a vegan portal. But like the person who was really, really behind all this. And I was like, it was you, wasn't he? He was like, it was me. I was like, because I brought it up before, because I think I talked about it mainly in episode 5. Maybe I talked about it in episode 4. But it was like, it had to be Scott, because once again, Wallace had asked the question, yeah, how'd you know about that conversation that only me and Scott were privy with? And it's like, yes, because it had to be future Scott. But I'm like, why would he do all this? Like, that's what I'm trying to understand. Is it because and the fact that he wrote that story, once again, I wonder, are we implying that the movie is the worst future? Like, oh, things kind of went badly in that timeline, and so Scott went 14 years into the past to change it so that this timeline flows more closer to the comic book. Like, I don't know if that's what they're once again, it's already a meta story already with meta elements, but I'm like, is it supposed to be even more meta in that regard? I don't know. Obviously, not obviously, maybe next episode, which is going to be the second to last episode of the season, we'll kind of really get into Scott's sides of things this entire season. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this takes us on that front. Before I wrap up, I did forget that Gideon did say, I thought he was just pumping himself up just for Julie's sake, but he's like, yeah, like, I have been planning plans this entire time, that I am seeking revenge against Matthew. I wonder, will it have anything to do with Scott Pilgrim's precious little musical? Like, I wonder if that's going to be it. But he's been biding his time, and maybe Lucas played a different role than just showing up and broing out. I mean, it's actually a really beautiful romance they've created, but it might be a little bit more than that. Like, what else has he been planning subsequently since he dropped by at Julie's? That's definitely going to be interesting to see what that relationship potential goes in the future as well, because that's an interesting pairing. But either way, it's good. Like I said, it's going to be interesting to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.